This is Amend and Progress, your go-to podcast from Vodori for all things promotional material review. Get ready for actionable insights, valuable perspectives, and best practices to elevate your workflow and team morale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amend and Progress, Vodori's podcast about the material review process. I'm your host, Annalise, and today we're going to be talking about managing promotional content across multiple geographies. And we're going to be talking about this from both a process and software best practice perspective. Joining me in the conversation today is Kristen Mezzano, Senior Manager of Account Management at Vodori. Kristen, welcome to the show. Delighted to have you.
Hey, Annalise, thanks for having me.
Kristen, could you just give a quick introduction of a little bit about you and your role at Vodori, just for the watchers and listeners out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the Senior Manager of Account Management here at Vodori. Prior to being in this role, which I started about a year and a half ago, I actually started at Vodori as an Enterprise Customer Success Manager, so overseeing one of our largest customer relationships. Through that, I've gotten some good exposure and understanding of how large organizations manage their global content strategy.
Awesome. And that's definitely going to come into play today, right? Because as we're talking about sort of this global to local model, that tends to be more relevant for the larger, more enterprise customers that we work with. So you were nominated as the right person to talk to about this internally. So definitely excited to get your perspective on the topic today. But as you know, before we get into the topic at hand, I like to just do some quick getting to know you questions, hopefully easy ones, just to give the folks at home a little bit of a sense of who you are. So let's start with, what's your morning beverage of choice? What do you reach for first thing in the morning?
All right. I usually keep it pretty simple. So I just make a coffee at home and usually do a little splash of almond milk in it.
I love it. Simple is best. I love it. Okay, what about current or favorite hobby?
Yeah, so I have actually just gotten back into my reading hobby this year. So with a couple young kids, got away from it for a few years, but beginning of the year, set a goal to read a book a month, 12 books, and we're in June. I've blown past my goal, so we'll see where I end up at the end of the year.
I love it. I think that's an amazing goal. I always set something similar to reading books per year, and it's just like, even if you don't get there, it's just nice to prioritize reading again. So I will say, if you haven't already, audiobooks are a great way to consume books really quickly. I don't know if you're an
Yeah,
audio, but that's been
absolutely.
really
I,
helpful.
I like to do a mix, but also recently realized Spotify has added so many audiobooks, so that's just made them so much more accessible. So yes, absolutely.
It's a good boost for the metrics. You tend to listen to them faster than you read them.
Absolutely.
Okay, final question. What is one productivity hack, best practice tip, something you use in your daily life?
Yeah, I would say maybe just the way that I manage my email. I know inbox zero is a thing, not realistic for me. I try to aim for like inbox less than 30, but have pretty robust foldering for anything that I'm no longer, looking at or need to take action on. And then in my inbox, just have clear labels of, what's on my to-do list, what's high priority, what might be items I'm waiting for someone else to get back to me on.
You heard it first here. Inbox less than 30.
TM, Kristen Mezzano.
I mean, I think you're onto something with that. I love it. I think we need to just like shout that from the rooftops. Okay, amazing. Well, thanks for entertaining those. It's just fun to like start the conversation with something a little easier.
Yeah.
Thanks for answering those. Okay, managing multiple geographies, global to local models. So like we've talked about, like you've mentioned, your sort of career at Vodori is managing sort of our larger, more enterprise customers, where of course this like global to local model comes into play a little bit more frequently, right? And so can you just like break this down in terms of like the model that we see in practice? Because of course there's a theoretical explanation of like what a global to local model is, but how does this like actually show up within our customers, within our day-to-day work with them?
Yeah. So, for a global content strategy, what we're oftentimes seeing is content that's going to be created or originate from a global or a corporate team that then gets disseminated down to country or regional teams for use of that content in their local markets, right? So we oftentimes know that there's going to be varying regulations by market. So this allows for the content that originates from a global team to then go through essentially a secondary round of review, this time through the lens of that local team's regulatory requirements. So this might include the addition of any necessary disclaimers that they need to add, slight modifications to the content to comply with any of those regulatory requirements, including modifications or slight language variations to the marketing claims that they're making within the promotional content. And then also we're seeing, oftentimes modifications to the imagery or other messaging that might just be better suited for the local market and who their target audience is.
Sure, that's super helpful, I think, in just sort of setting the stage here. And I mean, that's complex, right? You're working with, while you're working with the same core content, you have to sort of localize this. There are multiple teams involved. It's a different processes perhaps. And so talk me through, I hate to say like where things go wrong, but what are some of the common challenges that you see show up in executing a global to local model?
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges. I think when a customer comes to us and maybe doesn't have the support of software, I would say the biggest thing is going to be traceability. Being able to keep track of the content that has originated and where has that content ended up, managing the content relationships, being able to keep track of when the content has been updated. So essentially, changes are made globally and knowing that they've been effectively replicated within the markets. And then the opposite is true. Withdrawing the content globally is certainly a challenge. So something changes with your messaging or your strategy or your branding, and knowing that now this content is obsolete and being able to effectively withdraw it from the market. I would say another thing that we see is, just effectively getting the markets or the local teams to use the content. And so what we often see is kind of this push-pull model. And sometimes depending on the culture or the strategy of the organization, it might be one or the other. But oftentimes we're seeing this push-pull in combination. And so what that is a push model is effectively content that originates globally is being pushed to the local team. So, and there's, oftentimes, it's mandated that they then use and adopt that content. The opposite of that is the pull, where content is created globally. There might be a notification, hey, we have this new piece or group of pieces that's available to you. You can choose to accept it and have it go through your local team for review and approval. But oftentimes, like I said, we are seeing a combination of those in place. So it really depends on the strategy in terms of how that's going to be used. But I would say getting clear on what the expectations are is sometimes a challenge for the large enterprises to determine what that strategy looks like.
Of course. And getting folks to use the content that's created, I think, is a challenge no matter who you are, the size of the organization you're in. Like, that's just consistently showing up as like, we're putting time into creating this content. We want it to be used. And so I think that's just a really important like highlight of something we see across the board. I was especially with some of these enterprise customers where more content is being created, but that's definitely something I've heard from others as well.
Yeah.
The push-pull method is quite interesting to me. So you mentioned strategy drives some of the decision around the model. There's a mixed model, of course, but are there any other factors that you talk about with our customers in terms of identifying which of those models is going to work best? Are there criteria, characteristics, like what would make an organization decide to go one versus the other versus the combo?
I mean, I think it probably depends in part on the size of the organization. And I will say that, in addition to kind of this global local kind of hub and spoke model that we see, there are other factors that are going to be at play. So we often see, in addition to that, there could be this local for local content that's created. So jobs or content that is originated locally for the local use. And so that'll be used in combination, right, with the content that's being shared from the global team. Different cultures have different problems, and different target audiences are going to have to speak to different messages. And so being able to speak to a local market about what those, challenges are, and providing solutions to those problems through the lens of a local expertise is something that's going to be used in combination with that. And then the review requirements are of course, abbreviated in that it just needs to go through that local review. Similarly, we have this local to local content strategy that's kind of mixed in this. So that's sharing content between regions that might not necessarily originate globally. And so, for example, you have neighboring regions within Europe that might have similar regulations or similar target audiences that might share content between the two of them.
Just making the most of every piece of content that's being created, right?
Absolutely. And you kind of create this spider web of content that does get a little bit challenging and tricky.
But you can see a lot of value in it too. Not only does that maybe increase the content's use, but it makes the time spent creating that content even more efficient because it's being used that much more. So lots of
Absolutely.
benefits here. Okay, so you talked a little bit about some challenges. I imagine some of this will show up as we talk about like fundamentals or tenets of a good global to local model, but talk me through like advice that we give, best practices we provide, things we consult around in terms of making this model work really well.
Yeah. So I think just getting clear on what that global content strategy is, and I think that oftentimes starts with having a global SOP that has a unified strategy for the global consistency, right? So one thing I will say is determining what does content that's approved globally mean. Like oftentimes we're seeing that content that has been approved globally actually is not approved for use in any specific market. It's kind of like the top level initial approval, but then if you want to actually use this content, it needs to go through a local review. That's not always the case. If we have if there's an organization that's based in or headquartered in North America and the global team sits there, maybe global actually means approved for use in North America. So just defining what that looks like for your organization, determining what the order of operations is, what happens after content's approved globally. Like I mentioned, consideration of that kind of push and pull model, and what that looks like for your organization. What are the expectations? How that's going to be monitored, that's another thing. Who's accountable for the governance and the ownership of that process? So again, size of the organization is probably one of the factors that plays into this, but is there a global product manager that has eyes on all of the markets and overseeing this process? Or is there kind of a secondary level of product managers at the regional level that have a similar level of decision-making power and oversight that's going to oversee the execution of that process? But going back to your original question, what is the tenet of making this effective? I would say any enterprise, any large multi-geography organization that's executing on the strategy effectively, I think has to be doing it with software. I can't imagine doing this effectively without the use of software for things like traceability and all of the things that we've already mentioned.
It would just be, the traceability would be impossible. I mean, you would have to be sifting through files and email. I mean, it just sounds like kind of a nightmare. So let's go there. I mean,
Yeah.
Vodori is a software company, right? And so this is something that we do help our customers with. How does software support teams in executing content localization or the global to local model? What are some things that, you've mentioned traceability, I imagine claims come into play here. Like, how does it just support it? How can organizations think about software as being almost like a value add to this strategy and helping them execute it?
Yeah, I think the role of software can be hugely helpful for the management of content, particularly for multiple geographies. So it's effectuating the sharing capability of the content, number one. It's enabling, all of the compliance related attributes of an effective strategy. One being, the ability to restrict access and visibility of content based on market or region or, product line that team members support and all of those things. The ability to enforce a business process with software, again, tying it back to the importance of compliance and the ability to define unique workflows and dependencies depending on the region or the team or the product and all of that, and not relying on humans and all the error-prone processes that probably existed before.
Yes.
And then just, the traceability, like we mentioned, managing the relationships, creating a linkage of the parent and child, less maybe, doesn't rise to the top of mind immediately, but the ability to have a unique identifier of the content and including a region or a country code in that, so that content is really easy to, reference and identify as originating from that parent piece. What else? I would say, notifications that you're able to rely on within a software solution of, oh, there have been modifications made to this parent piece, or, oh, my piece of content is coming up for expiration. I better start a revision of this piece to make sure that I'm continuing to be in compliance with our SOPs.
Almost like spheres of influence. It can be so simple as a notification that something has changed, all the way to a system of record where there's complete traceability between the global content and the local content. What did those workflows look like? So it's almost like just these spheres of information that you can get from software that would be impossible to capture otherwise. And just
Absolutely. And I think to take it a step further is the metrics tracking that you get with a software solution, the analytics, and being able to track the percentage of content reuse and the speed of content, the speed of the approval speed and getting your content to market, and all of those metrics that might even drive things like business process decision, hiring decisions, things like that. So taking it even a step further.
yeah. So I hear, SOPs, roles and responsibilities, push-pull model comes into play here. And then software for that traceability are just sort of like some of these like factors that I think are just coming into play in terms of executing this, so that you're spending the time spent creating content is time well spent, and then it's getting used, right? With that metrics piece, I think just understanding how the content is being used, then of course can feed back into what comes next and how teams are sort of managing their time. So much great stuff today, Kristen. Any like last parting words or thoughts that you would want to leave the watchers and listeners with around this global to local model concept?
I would just say that it is a tricky topic and that you're not the first one facing these issues. So talk to your peers, talk to experts in the industry, consult folks that have done this before, and there are people out there that are able to help you.
Amazing. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for your time and perspective today. Just delighted to bring you on it and talk about this. So thank you.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
And folks, the conversation doesn't stop here, but follow Vodori on LinkedIn for updates on new episodes. Join in on the conversation. We'd love to hear questions, comments, feedback on any of the episodes to date. You can subscribe to Amend and Progress on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like today's episode, please rate and review the show. Until next time, this is Annalise signing off for Amend and Progress. Have a fantastic day.